Thanks for coming today. Welcome to Blueprint for Wealth, Business Succession Planning, episode 5 of 6 episodes. And many of you have been with me since the beginning of the year, and if you stay with me through the end on episode 6, you get a discount on services that we can provide to your customers or to yourselves if you want. So, stick with me. We're almost done. And the whole objective of this exercise is to take us through the life cycle of a business, all the way from the beginning to the very, very end, and then afterwards. The next session will focus on what happens after you exit the business. What do you do with your life? What do you tell your clients to do with your life? Today, we're going to dissect an acquisition from the very beginnings of it all the way through the acquisition agreement and some of the other ancillary agreements. So it should be hopefully educational for many of you. Others here probably know a lot about this. If you already know about it, I'd like you to ask questions and inject your thoughts as we're going along, because your expertise and your experience is really, really helpful. The first business succession planning session was all about launching your business and building a business plan. So we talked about that. We really dug into it from the very beginning to having a mission statement, values, vision, all that stuff, business planning, projections, and all the things that are associated with starting a business. The second session was all about growing and soaring your business, which was getting to the next level. And these sessions are being broken up into 10, 12-minute segments and videos and available on the internet. So, obviously, if you want to go revisit some of the things we talked about in these earlier sessions, go back and look at some of the earlier videos, and you have access to the prezzies. If you need copies of them, let me know. The third session was all about what happens when you hit rough waters. How do you navigate rough waters? What happens when bad things happen to good people? And the fourth session was all about exit planning and pre-transaction planning. It really sort of led up nicely to this session. So again, we're going to get into, our goal is to really show you how a merger or acquisition unfolds, the things that you need to be aware of if you're actually selling a business or your clients are selling a business, and getting into the nitty-gritty details. And we're going to use a hypothetical transaction. A hypothetical transaction is Helen, who is the owner of a government contractor that has, say, 300 employees and is about $35 million in revenue. Helen's company generates about $3 million of EBITDA, earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization a year. And her company has been growing pretty steadily, about 10 to 15% per year over the last 3 years. We'll call it ABC Corp. Okay? And my goal for you today to take away is the nuts and bolts of a merger and acquisition transaction. But first, we're going to start with four main areas that we're going to cover today are the following: negotiation. What are the skills of negotiation that you or your clients need to have, and the things that you need to be aware of when you're negotiating a merger and acquisition transaction? Due diligence is a major topic. What is due diligence? How do you conduct it? How much should you do as a seller, as a buyer? And why do we do this? And how is it used? And why is it so important? It's probably the second most important topic that we're going to talk about today. The acquisition agreement, the actual purchase agreement, we're going to dig into. And lawyers typically do that, but I think it's educational for people who are not lawyers to really understand what's in the acquisition agreement and why it's there, and it's really sort of the hot points that we're negotiating on behalf of our clients when we're doing this. And lastly, the employment agreements and other ancillary agreements, which end up becoming extremely important in the transaction, which may end up being deal killers or deal breakers in the end. If we haven't negotiated this stuff up front and we wait till the end to negotiate some of these things, it can be problematic. So, digging into the negotiation process, we're going to talk about how and what to negotiate. We're going to talk about the different structures of merger and acquisition transactions that you need to consider. as a seller mostly, because most of my clients are sellers. 95% of my deals are on the sales side. So I've represented buyers in buying companies over the years, but it's mostly selling off clients. And you think, well, why would you want to be in that business? Because you lose your client every time you sell them, right? Well, they come back, and they come back again, and they buy new businesses. And so it's fascinating how this process works. Letters of intent, we're going to talk about what a letter of intent is, what it should have and what it typically doesn't have. And then the whole merger and acquisition process. So for those of you that are actually going to go through an M&A transaction, a merger and acquisition transaction, we're going to just lay out on one slide of this the process. It could be done in a timeline, often is, but the listing of the issues that you deal with in the merger and acquisition process and what you have to go through when you're doing that is probably extremely important for those who are actually going to be in the sell side. So some thoughts on negotiation. There are different people in this world with different personalities. You know, some really brusque personalities, some people with bold personalities who dominate a room when they walk in the room, and you know, some people tend to shy away. Other people like to go up against them and, you know, stand up with them in the room. It's an extrovert versus introvert. That's not the way I think about negotiation. The way I think about negotiation is you really have to understand the concept of a transaction and where you're trying to get to. And what your goal should be in negotiating is to make it a win-win for everybody. This is not a mediation. This is not who can one-up the other. This is coming to compromise points, negotiating to compromise that will get you to a successful conclusion. It's also understanding what goes into a merger and acquisition transaction. I've got one deal that has been going on for almost a year. And it's not a very big deal. It's about a $10 million transaction. But I represent the seller, and the seller has been asking since the very beginning to the buyer, I want an integration plan. Anybody know what an integration plan is? Ed, what's an integration plan?
How the buyer is going to make use of the company it's acquiring.
How the buyer is going to make use of the company and the employees, but how are they all going to fit into the buyer's company?
Exactly. Is it going to keep it as a separate subsidiary, or is it going to integrate it? There's lots of options.
There's so many issues that come up in integration. Employees are probably the most important. Facilities, benefits for the employees. How are you going to treat these people? How do you treat your people? So it's integrating two potentially very different cultures. And so when you're negotiating this, my client was looking for this integration plan, and they still don't have it. They still don't have it. And the buyer has done transactions, a couple of transactions before, but they really have never had to deal with this from the seller's perspective. And the seller is saying, this is what I want, and the buyer's saying, well, I'm going to get it to you, I'm going to get it to you. But they were just going to wait till the deal was closed to do this. So talk about persistence and patience. We had to be very patient throughout this whole process, because at many times my client was ready to walk away from the deal. And my goal as the chief negotiator for him, along with the investment banker, was to keep him at the table, keep him calm, and have him understand that this buyer hadn't done this before. And so we're educating the buyer in an area that they're really not educated in. I've done so many transactions over the years where I've seen deals get closed. The investment banker wants the deal to close because they get their fee. The lawyers want the deal to close because they want to move on to the next transaction. Everybody wants the deal to close. The owner wants the deal to close because they want their money in their pocket, and they want to go off and go fishing, or go on vacation, or do something else that they're going to do. Well, what about the rest of the company and the employees? And so you don't always have the opportunity to close quickly. And if you close quickly, I've seen it so many times where you've closed a transaction, and then what do? Now we integrate. Well, the employees become upset in that type of environment. And if they're upset in that type of environment, how do we deal with that? so some of those merger and acquisition transactions can be very, they can lead to failure. And so negotiating is absolutely critical.